This is my 30-second pitch.
That's the big new sponsor?
Buy a Chevy.
No, actually it's not. It's Chevrolet. It's almost.
I would not buy, do not buy a used car from that
You can
man.
just pause that whenever you need to.
Let's pause it at a place that's not that. Well, not that either. All right, fine. Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here. This is weird for me to be here. I'm usually here as a person, as the director of this library, and today I'm here as not that person. But the library part of me is really happy to have you all here. The actual me has more mixed feelings. Absolutely. I should probably talk into it more. All right, so we're here to talk about my favorite subject, which is me. So we should start with how do I look? I don't know. I was thinking it should. If you can't name something, it's not really a thing yet. So this is called "Don't Die," or "Don't Die Today," or an explosion of cliches. So I met on Tuesday with Katie Hicks, and the two of us were going to help kind of sit down and figure out how to tell this story, because I used to be a newspaper reporter and now I'm not anymore, and now I read a lot, but you still always need help. And we came up with what seemed like a really good plan, and then a minute ago, Matt and I were talking. He said, "I'm looking forward to your talk. I'm sure it's going to be great. Everyone," this is a quote, "everyone likes," this is the quote part, "a logical journey story." Well, some people like stories that are also not logical journey stories, because Katie and I sat down and we're trying to figure out this story, and on my left, her right, was this like weird conversation between, it looked like a work meeting, but it felt like a bad date, and she was Bulgarian and everything sounds really mean in a heavy Bulgarian accent. And she was talking to this guy, and he said at one point, he said, "I was emotionally mature when I was 14 years old." And I was like, what the fuck did he just say? And Katie heard it, and so like I'm like scribbling notes to her upside down, like what is going on over here? And then on our right is Jay, the coder, who's coding, and he's such an interesting guy. He's listening to our conversation, and then he's listening through our conversation to their conversation. And he's like this Greek chorus telling us exactly what's happening 2 tables over. It was while he's coding, which is super impressive. So the story that we came up with, a good logical story, has a beginning, a middle, and an end. This one will have kind of a prelude, and then an end, and then maybe a little beginning, and then back to the end, and then possibly into a time machine. And it's gonna seem way less logical than that when it happens. All right, so we'll start with the prelude, which is, I was diagnosed with diabetes when I was a freshman in high school. And this doctor, I still hate him to this day, was an older guy, and I think he had come up in a different time, and he said, "You should expect to lead a nice, normal life into your 30s. I'm like, geez. Even at 15, I was like, that seems a little hard. And this is 1980, well, it would have been about 1980. So care has improved a lot in those years, but that really climbed right into my head. And still, you know, I was really good at being a diabetic. I was fantastic at it. I was disciplined and I worked hard and I had good blood sugars, and I never had any of those kind of dire consequences that people have. So everything was going really well. And then it didn't, the wheels just completely came off, and suddenly I was sick. Suddenly I could not control my blood sugar, which does happen after, you know, to some people after, you know, a long time. All right, so that was the prelude. And now we're gonna miss, all right, and then I got on a transplant list to become a transplant recipient for a pancreas, which produces insulin, and now I have one. I'm not a diabetic anymore. I haven't had a drop of insulin in about 3.5 years. So that was the middle. Now we're gonna go to the end. I woke up on November 2nd, 2013, and I had a new pancreas in me, and it worked. Everything was great. I was like, wow. So that's kind of the end of the story. Or what I thought at the time was the end of the story, because then it wasn't great. I had a rejection, which I learned in the medical community that if you say a word twice, it has more meaning. So I was told, oh, you're having a rejection, but it's not a rejection. So I didn't lose it. I had a rejection, then I had chemotherapy to help with that, then I had pneumonia, then another pneumonia, then pancreatitis, and I lost 40 pounds in 40 days. And I was fairly thin to begin with. I'm gonna hit play because I'm gonna see if I'm smart enough to, oh, that's me, and that's Luke hugging me, and Theo, I'll just hit play because this thing's coming up. It will. This is. No, wait. Well, I don't know where the heck it is. We'll find it. I'll pause it when it comes up. So that's me getting very sick. And at one point I started thinking, oh, I'm gonna die. I'm gonna just not make it. It's all gonna go away. And it wasn't even gonna be a great death. It was just gonna be like a boring, he got a head cold and his body was weak, and never have that done if you can avoid it. And then I started feeling better. So now we're skipping through that and to a new end. I was very sick for 2 months, 6 weeks. And then I got better. I started eating cheeseburgers and I started gaining weight. That's before. So there's all kinds of time stuff happening here. So I guess so this talk is about what happens after you don't die. And that's when things get really interesting. But first you have one choice, that's pneumonia. You can become smug and insufferable, which you should try on for a while because it's really fun. Take it off. Oh God, you don't want to hear that. All right, that's me almost dying. That's me, the photo editor at the Inquirer said, oh, we're not going to use that picture. I said, well, why not? And he said he was in the Air Force for a long time and he drove an ambulance, and he said, that's what people look like right before they die. You don't want that picture. But as you can see, I didn't die. We'll leave this up because I love the face on the guy. I love his face. He's just like, I don't know, man. That looks really bad. So here's what I figured out when you don't die. So like, I guess we're supposed to, like, Katie said, well, what do you want people to know at the end of this thing? And I said, I don't know. I still don't know, but I do know that for me, everything changed. And then I realized nothing changed. Like the whole world stayed exactly the same, and I was walking through it differently. So, which felt like I controlled, like made me feel completely in control and completely out of control. Like, because clearly nothing changed. Your life didn't change. You went about your day, and I looked like that. And then I didn't look like that, and I began to look like this, for better or for worse. And when you realize that, that's a very hard discovery. It was for me. Because the things that make sense to you, that made sense to me before that, they stop making sense, or they make less sense. Because, now I was probably living a life either more examined or examined at all. Everything becomes harder, better, but harder. Relationships are harder. I didn't think I was going to live forever. Now I think I'm immortal. Which is going to ultimately be a disappointment, but not yet. I've got 4 kids and a wife, and when you think you're only going to live a little, you don't think you're going to live forever, you say, oh, well, things are good enough. And then afterwards, you're like, oh, well, boy, we either have to fix this or become content with it, or think about, is this the right thing? Like, all of a sudden, you're looking at all of this stuff really differently, and it's hard, and like, no one asked for it. Like, now I'm the pain in the ass who's like, hey, hold on a minute. I've had this experience, and I'm feeling things now. As soon as someone says that, just run as fast as you can. But that's, there's a lot of change, and it's all in you. I think I probably have more acquaintances than I used to have, but I have fewer friends. I wish I had more friends. I'm gonna work on it. It just seems like so much work. But the hardest part for me in the last couple of years, and this is maybe, if this story has a theme, it's I have become, and this is, no one who has known me for a long time does not find this hysterically funny. I have become emotionally available. Which is even worse than it sounds. I feel like Paul Ryan. I don't feel like Paul Ryan. I do not ever feel like Paul Ryan. This isn't about politics. All right, so kind of this story is about emotions and me. And I had gone through life for about 30 years at that point as emotionally withdrawn. I don't know why. There's probably a variety of reasons why any of us become emotionally withdrawn. It is hard. I'm Irish, which never helps, where you're either brooding or yelling. But I think it was my fault, and I know I have a sister named Mara. I was the youngest of 5 kids, and we were born in 7 years, and we were all very close. I was particularly close to Mara, and then when I was a freshman in high school, she died in a car, freshman in college, she died in a car accident. And I was completely unprepared for this. She was in Europe, she was ahead of me in college, and she was hitchhiking and got in an accident and died. And she had put me as her contact information, which was something that we always did because we figured it would be the police calling and we didn't want our parents getting the phone call. And she had always been instructed to say she was my mother, and I had always been instructed to say I was her father, and that yes, I would handle this very seriously. But that was the State Department calling. And I was a wreck. I went a year and I didn't cry. And I mean, I've never loved anyone more than I loved Mara. But I just I think I just shut down. And then I went about 2 weeks where I cried nonstop. And then I was like, all right, this is exhausting. So I'm just gonna turn all of this off. This is gonna be so much better and so much easier, and no one needs all this crap. They don't need me not crying, and they don't need me crying. That's not a particularly great way to go through the world. I do like to think, and I've double checked, I was always there for my kids. We have 4 kids, and they're terrific and rarely get in trouble and are almost always perfect. But everything changed when I came out of this, when I stopped looking like this. And part of it was, I thought, I was sitting there, I'm like, God, that life should have been so much more. I missed so many connections. I wasn't present. It sounds awful, I know the term present, but I meant it. So I'm gonna kind of tell you who that guy was. This is where I was. This is the start of the newspaper story, and I'm gonna read it, but it's gonna be fast, I promise. Fast-ish, because I think we'll do questions, and then this is who I was at that time. This is when I was on the waiting list, and waiting lists had support groups. You can imagine how well I did in support groups. This is how I started my newspaper story that went like 12 pages long. It started with, I do not like support groups. The only thing I like less than talking about my feelings is listening to other people talk about theirs. But, asshole. I wanted to be very honest in this story. But on a Saturday morning in March of last year, that would have been 2013, I walked into room 6104 at the University of Cincinnati Medical Center. The space is too small, the table too big, and the air never seems to move. This is an organ transplant support group, and everyone here knows sickness intimately and speaks of it openly. They talk about constipation and catheters like most people talk about the weather. I look around to see if anyone else is about to hyperventilate. 2 of us are waiting for transplants, and we say almost nothing. Everyone else has received one, and they don't stop. I don't want to know about hard times and doubt. I have no interest in drug protocols and risk factors. I want to stop being a diabetic. I want to be well. I have no interest in the truth, but the truth is sitting right in front of me. She has long brown hair, and her coat is zipped up to her chin. Her skin is gray, and she looks so tired. She does not say a word until she is asked to introduce herself and tell everyone why she is here. Her voice is raspy. She says she has been on the wait list for a pancreas for more than a year. Nobody wants to be listed for a year. After 365 days, you have to go through the listing process again, meaning more medical tests and more meeting with social workers and more blood work and more judging, and you can be delisted. This woman had just been put on hold, meaning she was off the list. Her doctor said her heart had grown too weak. They gave her medicine and said it might make her healthy enough to get back on the list, but you could tell she does not really believe them. She said she might go to to visit her sister in Florida, and the room goes quiet. Finally, she exhales and says, "Anyway," and all I could think is that she is one fewer person waiting for a pancreas in front of me. I never learned her name. So there's a lot happening when you're on a list. And this is kind of a story about a list, and you become a ghoul. You know, you're waiting for someone to die. Pancreas isn't a kidney. You gotta, and I've gotten to know the family of the young woman, Alexis, who's 27 years old, who died in a car wreck. And I have her pancreas, and she has 4 kids. I have 4 kids, and she has 4 kids. So I guess her pancreas has 8, which she probably finds exhausting. So that's who I was. And then that list, being on that list, don't ever, if you go on a transplant waiting list, take notes, because you're going to find out so much about yourself. So that's how I became this guy, and now I cry all the time. I cry. The kids watch me watch movies, and it's like Vegas. There's an over and under line. Is he gonna cry 20 minutes into this thing, or is he gonna? You want the over or you want the under? And everyone's like, I want the under. Give me the under. He's gonna cry at 18. I know it. I told you this story would make no sense and not follow a line. So I like this, and I think everyone should be this to the extent that they want to. I love that I now can feel things, and I know how much it sucks sometimes, and that it's harder, and it is not like a bed of roses. I should have kept track of my cliches. Live every day as if it's your last. Actually, live every day as if yesterday was your last, and you found a way to sneak through it. I had found that those muscles, those feeling muscles, had atrophied. We can take a vote. It is atrophied. Had stopped working well. And that it was real, and that the most dramatic thing that happened in this year before and year after was getting the pancreas, were those 7 hours of surgery where they cut you open like a cantaloupe and cram this thing in you and sew it together. And that was the most dramatic, but in a lot of stories, it was the least interesting, and certainly the least important. Everything that happened before and after is what I'm gonna take with me, and which is kind of survival. I guess it's, what does it say? What is your greatest survival skill? Not dying. Which is actually the best survival skill. Become immortal. So, do you want me to keep talking about this? Do you guys want to have questions? Do you want to, I want you to know that woman who was in there about a year ago reached out to me, and she never got a pancreas. And I don't know if she's alive today, but she read that story and she knew exactly who she was. And I felt terrible because I hated that person. I understand that person, who I was. I wasn't a dick. You'd have met me and you'd be like, oh, he's a pretty nice guy. Some of you knew me before that. But when you talk to that person who, I mean, I decided to be honest as like I needed to be. I was constipated for 12 days. 12 days. Wait to think about that for a minute. And my editor took that out of the story. I'm like, no, that's me being super real. People don't need to know everything, John. He was probably right. So here's my survival skills. Become an organ donor. It'll make you feel better. And it might help someone, and it doesn't cost you anything. Being emotionally available sucks, but it's probably worth it. Examining and re-examining your life is really hard on everyone you know. Everyone was like, wait a minute, what that? My brother Paul wants to know exactly which organ I had transplanted. He's like, when did you become a woman? Like, please shut up. I love having Paul as my brother. We go to a Bears game every year. We're both from Chicago, and so every year we go on a road trip and see the Bears play in some obscure place, and we like drink wine like we just landed on an island, which is great. But he is evolving. He sells glass and he lives in Malibu. So go sell glass. That's what happened to me. And don't have that be you. Either stay the way you are or get to this thing more gradually. That would be my emotional advice. I don't know if I'm succeeding or failing. Kate, how are we doing up here? All right. She said I'm doing great. And that I sound just like Paul Ryan. That was Paul Ryan, right, with the water? Oh, was it Rubio? Oh. Now I don't know how to feel. Is that better or worse? So does anyone have any questions? Because I'll stand up here and talk. Yes, sir.
The question I had about friends versus acquaintances. After your illness and the entire procedure, do people more interested in curiosity and asking about your health than they are asking about you? Like, instead of like, hi John, how's it going? I was like, hi John, how's your health?
Yeah, I did have a lot of that, and I hated it. Now I'm extremely fortunate. I feel healthier today at 51 than I did at 21. I mean, I know how lucky I am. That sucked. One of the things that happened is I found out, and I think this is, there's like becoming emotionally available was like when I was absolutely feeling at my worst. People were so kind to me. And like there was this like community of people who like you didn't anticipate. And that was another piece of this. I was like, oh God, there really are a lot of kind, caring people in the world who I didn't even know liked me all that much. They kept bringing food. I've always wanted to write them all back and say, I didn't eat any of that food. So could you start that thing up again and everyone bring dinner to the house for a couple months, because that kind of sucked. I could smell it and it made me nauseous. So your food made me barf and I didn't even eat it. This is also the world's greatest diet plan if you want. If you want to lose a ton of weight, don't eat food for 40 days. Turns out you can lie on a couch and do nothing. I have never been less active in my life, and I was losing a pound a day. That was, all right, if you have a question, raise your hand. Yes, Kate.
What are some of the kind
The my next door neighbor is a guy named Horst, which I just love saying. And I went for a bike ride. See, this is what you do to people when you're sick. That's Lucy, and she thought I was dying. And she was a mess. I wore that snappy scarf a lot because I was freezing. It was the coldest winter we ever had, literally, in Cincinnati. Horst, I said I was going to go for a bike ride. This is the first time I'm feeling good. And I'm like, I want to start exercising again. And everyone's in a panic. Like, you cannot go on a bike ride. I can go on a bike ride and ride. I ride all the time. And Horst, oh God, we're not keeping that up. Horst went with me. That's me saying I'm never going to be a guy with a pillbox. Horst is a quiet guy, a really nice guy. He's a transplant from Germany and he works at P&G. He got on his bike and he rode with me, and he rode behind me. And he didn't say a word. And even while I was like, because I was like, no, I really want to go alone. And he saw me bring the bike out. He's like, what are you doing? I said, I'm going for a bike ride. And he was like, no, you're not going to go for a bike ride alone. And so I went I was really weak and tired, and I hadn't done any exercise, and it felt so good. And I rode, I found out later, I retraced it. I did 2 miles, 1 mile out, 1 mile back. I like to ride. I can go a long way. It was a 2 mile ride, but he rode behind me and he didn't say a word, and he wouldn't let me leave until he was ready. I put my bike out, and then I came out 5 minutes later to go, and his bike was there. And he was really smart and caring and thoughtful, and he knew he knew I needed someone, but he didn't want to bother me. And so he rode behind me the whole way. And then I turned around and he turned around, and he never said a word about it. He never talked about it. We talk all the time. But it was it's such a picture in my head, and it's like a picture of someone caring. I'm going to go on this bike ride with you, and I'm going to not say anything. I'm just going to follow you. I'm going to be there, and we're not even going to talk about it. I'm just going to be there just in case something bad happens. Nothing bad happened, but that bike ride, I can see. It was such a singular moment in my life, and I think visually, which is terrible for a person who used to write words for a living. I would want to make terrible sketches and say that. That was that was a moment where I realized, oh God, there are so many kind people in our world who, even though, like I said, nothing changed, I changed. Well, one of the things I changed is that the world is filled. I realized that the world is filled with super decent and caring people. And that's always such a wonderful revelation. You forget. But like I said, this stuff, for me, I probably didn't go from 0 to 100. I probably went from 4 to 70. And I think 70 is probably a good number for me. I'm not looking to get to 80 on this thing. But that's how I survived. So that's what survival looked like to me. Don't die.
So do you find yourself getting involved in, I'm going to say, messiness of life for others?
Yes.
More so?
Yes. I'm far more. I am a. I think I'm a more considerate and grateful person, and I am not scared by you coming to me and saying I'm a wreck. I'm like, all right, great. Let's figure this out. You know, let's figure out how I can do something. How I can be horsed on the bike. I can ride with you. I can ride behind you. I can ride in front of you. But I like to be. I want to get on that bike with you, and you tell me, or we'll figure it out where you want me. But yeah, I do that. I think I've become a more empathetic person. You know, one of the reasons I love working at a library is I believe empathy comes from knowledge. And so I gained a shit ton of knowledge doing this, and it has made me a far more empathetic person. And probably way more boring.
So I've got two questions. They start from the same starting point, but probably go in very different places. Your job changed after this at some point. Now you're doing what you're doing. How did that change your relationship to writing and your work? Like, was this a part of any of that? And also, how do you feel like, so if we're talking about survival, journalism is in a period where there's a lot of pieces changing. The newspaper, which is also probably connected, is going through some amount of survival mode. How do you feel like also the industry is changing? So, like I said, two different places.
All right, well, what I found out is that writing, like emotions, are an exercise, are a muscle that you need to exercise. I've become way worse of a writer. I mean, I think I could become a good writer again. I was a good writer, and now I'm an okay writer. We talked about that. I wrote an obituary of John Glenn. I'm a space nerd. So before I left, I wrote this obituary of John Glenn because I had written the obituary for Neil Armstrong, and I realized, I'm like, God, he's in his 80s. We better knock this out too. And I remember thinking, this is not good enough. This was a great man. He deserves a better obituary than this. This is okay, but it's not great. And then it, you know, like when did he die? A half a year ago, a couple months ago. And that story ran. I was like, oh my God, that story is fantastic. I couldn't write that story today. So I have become I have to work on it. I walked away from writing, and it was probably a good idea, but it's now a better idea. And so I stopped. I'm going to start again. And as for the newspaper, oh man, I think we're in trouble as a city. We need a good newspaper. Every good city needs a good newspaper. Every bad city needs a good newspaper. Every city needs a newspaper. They have to, I mean, they're what happens when you get into a crisis mode and you have a near-death experience and you just say, well, let's just keep doing exactly what we've been doing. People still love stories, and they love knowing what's going on in the world around them. That's not going to change. I don't know that newspapers are going to be the platform. I think in the next 10, 20 years, so many papers are going to close. They're just not going to exist. Other stuff will come up. CreativeMornings will become a place where people talk about stuff, and this is where people will go. But ugh. That's my assessment of the newspaper industry.
Who's doing it right?
The Washington Post, the people who are investing in it. The Inquirer was good to me. I can't complain about them. But they're a corporate paper, and every newspaper has got to a point where they said, all right, we're failing. We've got to figure out we're going to spend more money or we're going to spend less money. And the ones that spent less are getting worse, and it's like, hey, no one wants to buy our car. Let's strip it down and put nothing in there. The Post, the Times, the Wall Street Journal are all doing amazing jobs. But if you want to find a good long story, you have to go look for it now. And they might have it, or, you know, long form might have it, or, you know, other stuff's going to take place. We're not going to, we've been telling stories to each other for 1,000 years, for thousands of years. That ain't going away. People still want to know what's happening. But I am worried. I'm terrified of what's going to happen. You know, when I started at this paper in Brockton, Massachusetts, the Brockton Enterprise, lovingly referred to as the Brockton Empty Prize. But I covered selectmen meetings. Massachusetts governments in these small towns, they have selectmen, which is kind of like a small council, but they decide stuff that costs like $500,000 or $2 million, and this is taxpayer money. And every one of those selectmen meetings in every one of these small towns in Massachusetts was covered by a reporter. I don't think a reporter has been at a selectmen meeting in Massachusetts in 10 years. And I think we're going to look back 10 years from now and say, holy crap, when we stopped covering these places, they all started having inappropriate relationships with each other and spending millions of dollars. They all became drunken sailors. And I think that's something we might catch up to. That's getting sick and not changing, which is not to say I'm any better than the Inquirer, but I was dumb enough to change. All right, you're next, I promise.
What does your wife and children think of your transition?
I think well, that's a really complicated. My kids love it. You know, I tell them every day how much I love them and blah, blah, blah. My dad loves me very much. I tell my kids I love them more in a week than he has told me in 51 years. I know he loves me. We're good, but so I think they like it. It's, you know, it was a change for them. Laura and I, you know, marriage is hard. And we've been married 22 years, and then when something really significant happens in the middle of it, you know, I don't know, probably mixed feelings. Stuff's, you know, this is not, none of this is easy. Changing in your middle life, or the second half of your life, or I think I'm still in the second act. Early in the third, or late in the second, or how about the middle of the second act? I'm going to live to be 100. That's not easy for anybody. Certainly not easy for the people you are intimate with. How's that for a kind of awful answer?
So, as an avid reader, how has becoming emotionally available affected the way that you approach books and you process stories?
Oh, that's interesting. I love reading. I've always loved history, and I've always loved fiction, and I've been reading more historical fiction. I do love reading. I call reading watching, which is just terrible. I do think visually. Kate Atkinson writes these books about, has written her last 2 books about people living in England, a country I hate, during World War II. And they're amazing. So like watching these people, watching human beings going through trying times that are real is a genre I really keep going back to more so than ever before. And there's great work in that field. And I'm a little nerdy about it, so I do hate England. My grandfather made me. I should stop talking about England. Did that answer your question? Do you want me to stop? Oh, yes, sir.
Did you, after all of this experience, did you experience survivor's guilt afterwards, during this process? Or afterwards, after you've been
A little bit. There was another like very singular moment when you find out the transplant process is there's silos. So if you want to find out if you want to figure out who to say thank you to, you send it to the transplant organization, and the transplant organization talks to the family of the donor, and everything's running through hoops. And when you're waiting for a transplant, you want a really young, healthy organ. And then I got this letter from the mother of Alexis, and I'm reading this letter, and she's telling me all about her daughter, and then she's talking about like when she graduated from college, from high school in 2006. I don't know if I have the number right, but it was like that, and I'm thinking, well, God, that can't be right. I mean, if she graduated from high school in 2006, how old could she be? And so be careful what you wish for, because then I'm thinking, you want a really good organ, but Alexis was driving, and she was 27 years old, and it was 4 in the morning, and she was going to one of her 3 jobs, and the road was slick, and tires spun, and she went into a cornfield at the exact place where there was a telephone pole. You couldn't do it again if you tried 1,000,000 times. And that made me feel really guilty. That made me feel like, oh God, I was hoping, what was I thinking? Well, I'm hoping for I want the best pancreas I can get my hands on. Then you get it. And that made me feel terrible. I remember reading that letter. I was like, oh, shit. She's a baby. And she had 4 kids. I saw her husband this week. He's remarried, great guy. And when her mother invited me to this Easter party, which is a terrible idea. It's like Easter, and it's an Easter egg, and they live in Cleves. And I was there with Laura and I and the 4 kids, and Henry was he's our oldest. He was like 16 or 17, and the husband shows up, and he's, I think, drunk and mad and going through a lot. I mean, his wife, the mother of his 4 kids, has died in a car accident. And there's a couple months later, and here comes this guy, that his mother-in-law, who he doesn't like, has invited to the Easter party. It makes sense. I thought there was going to be a fight. I mean, it was that bad. He's like driving up and down the street in his car, in his pickup truck, and I turned to Henry, I'm like, all right, listen, this is going to get really terrible. Get your mother and your brothers and your sister into the van. I'm going to run up into these hills. And someone will jump in before he stabs me to death with his toothbrush. And I mean, I was really scared. And then 6 months later, he wrote me the most thoughtful, intelligent letter. And he was talking about that day and how he was still going through a lot, and he's a fantastic guy. But God, I've got that, getting to know the family of Alexis, who died with this really her final act is super graceful and elegant and caring. For me, someone she's never met. I met another guy, and he got one of her kidneys. A 2-year-old got another one of her kidneys. But I saw him this week at the soccer game. It's weird. It has to be amongst the weirdest relationships I've ever been in. And anyone who has a relationship with Alexis's mother is in a weird relationship. She's a very nice woman. She's a very nice woman. Her name's Terry. All right, you want me, I should shut up. It's 11, or 10. Feels like 11. Thank you.